This episode is proudly supported by Pepe Sayer Australian Cultured Butter.
The Pepe Sayer all new Australian butter sheets. Everything we've learned over the last 12 years, we've put into making this new butter sheet. Combined with a brand spanking new shiny machine from Switzerland, we're able now to produce this beautiful butter sheet that's so easy to laminate with. So it's pliable, it's very fresh. If you're an Australian baker buying our butter sheets, they're made weekly. The formulation, it's a beautiful unsalted butter that will work for savoury and sweet. I think it's a perfect balance there. The bakers and pastry chefs that are using it are just raving about it.
For more information, go to pepesayer.com.au.
Dim Sim is one of the most amazing pieces of Melbourne street food. It is unique. It started here in Melbourne. It is a Melbourne thing. You don't see dim sims in other parts of the world like we have here in Melbourne.
Hey everybody, it's Dani Valent here with you for an episode of Dirty Linen. It is coming up to Melbourne Food and Wine Festival time, and it's always a pretty exciting time of the year, a great spot on the calendar. I'm always eating, but at that time of year, I am eating even more. Now, there are so many events in this program. We could chat about the international stars that are coming out. Danielle Calvert from Cézanne is joining Dan Hunter at Bray. St. John Restaurant is taking over French Saloon. Constantin Philippou is hanging out at Vue du Monde. We could talk about all these international chefs, but actually, let's talk about the history of Melbourne street food with local food writer and culinary excavator Richard Cornish. Richard, welcome to Dirty Linen.
You made me sound like a caterpillar digger and the culinary excavator. I haven't been described as that before. I quite like it.
Well, it just sprang to my lips without my brain really knowing about it. But I reckon it's not a bad description of you. You are, I think, in an arena of food media where there is a lot about the, what's happening right now, what's going to happen next. I think you are someone who puts food in context for us. And yeah, you've just got a broad knowledge base, and you're always, you're always expanding it. So I love it.
Danny, that's what's missing, I think, in the discussion about food these days is that as a cultural context. Food comes from the environment. It comes from the soil. It comes from the rain that falls from the sky. It comes from the people who know how to grow it, how to harvest it at the right time, and how to cook it. And there's this huge links that go back from our mouths to the land in a backwards progression, and then it's back in time as well. Food didn't come out of nowhere. It doesn't come out of a packet. It doesn't come out of just a restaurant or a factory. It comes from 10,000 years of tradition of food cultivation, preparation, and consumption. And that's what I think is missing in the dialogue. That's what I like to bring to everything I do.
Yeah, well, I think it's really rich and important. So tell us about the Dirty Dozen, stories behind the foods that made Melbourne. Part of this is Melbourne Food and Wine Festival program.
Starting on March 13th, the Dirty Dozen. The Dirty Dozen is the name given to an exhibition. It's an exhibition. It's a static exhibition at the Melbourne Gallery it's actually just underneath the town hall. It's run by the City of Melbourne. City of Melbourne have a collection. They have a collection of artifacts from Moomba, from grand openings, grand dinners, the Olympic Games. They have all this ephemera, all these trophies, awards, pictures, diagrams, photographs that extend back since the 1841, since the City of Melbourne was incorporated, and so part of the remit of the collection is to celebrate the collection. And I was approached by the City of Melbourne a guy called Eddie Butler Bowden, who's who works for the collection. He runs the collection to do an exhibition based on the collection. It was all about food, and we started off talking about the menus because they have these menus that go back to the 1850s, 1860s, 1870s that celebrated the likes of like American generals that were here, the great preachers, royalty, and the city or the city burghers, the basically rich white men, would hold dinners for these people to celebrate their arrival or the departure. But there's really massive dinners that involve lots and lots of courses, lots and lots of French-style dishes that would basically to cook our mutton, our Murray cod, our eels, all washed down with French wine. And so it seemed really, to do an exhibition around that would be really odd, because it was missing that other part. It was missing the cultural context. It was missing what were the hoi polloi eating, what were the people of the street eating. And so we turned it on its head and developed an exhibition about what the people of the street were eating. But because street food is ephemeral, there's not a lot of collateral around the pies, the oysters, the cups of coffee that were being consumed on the streets in the 1880s to the early 20th century. And so we had to go back in time, research what they look like, and then recreate them. And we got a young artist called Kenny Pittock, to recreate all these things we once put in our mouths, but in ceramics. He's taken clay, he's molded them to look exactly like a Chico roll, to look exactly like a dim sum in a paper bag. And he's recreated that in clay, fired it, and then hand painted it to make it look exactly like what once was.
I just love this idea of this ephemera, this stuff that's, really hard to categorize. It's not what we would consider a museum piece traditionally, is now in ceramic forever.
It's funny because if we found a Chico roll dug up in an archaeological site, it would be put behind glass and then given a cultural context, given an interpretive panel. But because it's so recent, it's not celebrated as such, and so that's why we've gone and recreated them in ceramic.
I love it. So what were a couple of the food items that really grabbed you? What do you want to focus on?
So, Dani, it's the Dirty Dozen. So we've found 12 of these street foods that were eaten from colonial times until around about 2000. We drew the line. It starts off with perhaps the most significant, the most important street food in Melbourne, and that is the Angasi oyster. And you're familiar with the Angasi oyster, the native oyster of Port Phillip. Yeah, these meaty oysters that once formed great reefs underneath Port Phillip and Western Port. They're a native oyster. They don't cling to rocks like a Sydney rock. They form reefs or just live under the sand. And they have been inhabiting the bay for thousands of years. They are incredibly important food source to the Bunurong people of the eastern side and the Wathaurong people on the western side of the bay. Bunurong women would harvest these 3 times a week and would roast them over coals, and the shells were discarded, creating these huge middens that were metres high and tens of metres wide. But upon colonialisation, we colonials just went, wow, here we go, oyster sauce. We used to eating these in our pubs in Sydney, in London, in Launceston, Hobart. Let's go. And we basically within 30 years, we'd almost decimated, almost destroyed the oyster reefs in Port Phillip, and then moved to go across to Western Port, then to the lakes of around Gippsland. When we were eating these in saloons, on streets, in bars and carts, washed down with champagne. Yes, champagne from France, chilled on Canadian ice.
Wow, that is a very international snack.
Yeah. And so by the 1880s, we'd almost eaten them all. We destroyed a way of life for the Bunurong people. We'd actually dug up those middens, turned them into lime to make cement for our buildings. And then we start to bringing Sydney rocks down from the southeast coast of New South Wales and steam them down into Melbourne because we'd eaten them all. All that's left today, a handful of living Angasi oysters, like there's just a few, less than 5%. And those big wide shells you see about the size of the palm of your hand on Port Phillip, they're the ghost oysters. They're the ones that remain from, hundreds of years ago.
Are they likely to come back?
Those oysters, the Nature Conservancy, worldwide conservation program, is creating artificial reefs and reseeding them with that 5%. And so whether they come back, we may have destroyed that habitat. We may have destroyed all the co-inhabitants, the things that were living with them. We may have destroyed that ecosystem. So whether they come back in reefs is one thing, but we are artificially rehabilitating parts of the bay. But that's just one of the foods, and so that celebrates that dirty story. It's that okay, we had oysters, and this is the sad social history of it. We destroyed an ecosystem. We destroyed thousands of years of culture by consuming them. But then again, our street food in Melbourne was also a chance for people to grow, to come here to Australia from all around the world, as everyone who's a non-Indigenous person did, and create a new life for themselves. There's a family called the Pera family in Melbourne. They did things like they built the St Kilda Pier kiosk originally. They're from Catalonia. They came to Australia in the 1850s. They arrived in the goldfields in Bendigo, and they thought, okay, there's a lot of hungry diggers here, so we'll start cooking for them. Let's serve them pies. They seem to like pies. They came to Melbourne. They started a pie kitchen on the side of around about where St Paul's Cathedral is now in about the 1850s. The Pera family then went on to start Melbourne's first restaurant after cooking pies, and that was called the Spanish Restaurant. That's opened in 1854. The Pera family, of your Catalan, Parer, they went on to own lots of pubs. They developed Box Hill. There's a Barcelona Street in Box Hill, and I think anyone with a knowledge of history of wartime photography will know a photographer called Damien Pera, who photographed the Aussie troops on the Kokoda Trail, and there's some really famous photographs that he did. So there's this multi-generational family that lives in Melbourne. They had a huge influence on our media. They had a huge influence on the way we dine, and it all started with a humble pie baked in a kitchen in St Paul's Cathedral. And we've recreated that pie in this exhibition, The Dirty Dozen. And it doesn't look like a 4 and 20 pie. It actually looks like a Scotch pie with just a little flat top on it. And
what were they putting in their pies?
Putting in their pies. There's a lot of mutton and still, the 4 and 20 pie is actually made with mutton. But going back then, mutton. We had a huge pastoral industry, and once you shear a sheep for so many years, it stops producing fine wool, and then you've got to knock it on its head. And so we also had a huge amount of mutton. We didn't eat lamb until really recently. So the source of meat was going to be mutton and beef. But more likely mutton and or beef, and then there are stories of less creditable makers of pies who would use all sorts of other things, including marsupials.
So, Rich, I know that pies have got a special place in your family's history. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, I love the way that street food enables people to get a leg up. There's low barriers to entry to do street food, to do fast food on a small level, and it helped us out. My family, we're a farming family, and there was a whole lot of circumstances that pushed us to the wall in the early 80s. And Mum scraped her coins together and bought a little place called the Merrick's General Store down the Mornington Peninsula, and she and her business partner then went on to bake pies, sausage rolls, pasties, and build up that business selling hot fast food to the surfies and to farmers. That the money she made when she sold the shop set her up for the rest of her life. She was able to get over that financial difficulty and raise a family of four, or as a single mum. And so we've seen that story repeated over and over and over again. People, when migrants come to Australia, often they're in not generally not in a really high point of power when it comes to personal economics. They're often poor. And so opening a shop, opening a bakery, opening a fur shop, opening a place where you can sell gyros or souvlaki has been a repeated story that happens in Melbourne's history over and over and over again. One of the things we've got is a souvlaki that Kenny Pittock, the ceramicist, has recreated a beautiful looking souvlaki in a paper bag. The paper bag looks like it's paper. The flatbread looks like flatbread, and inside the lamb, the lettuce, the tomato, it all looks real. And when we've been serving souvlakis in Melbourne probably since the 1860s, when there's a group of people came from the islands of Greece, about 200 of them, setting up in Lonsdale Street, and they were serving souvlaki. Probably wouldn't look like the gyros, which we have, which is the circular meat that goes round and round and round. Probably just more like grilled meat on the charcoal grill, grilled lamb or mutton, and sliced up and then put onto the flatbread. But that's been part of our history for all that time.
What's it like for you to walk around the city now, which has been layered and layered and layered? You know, you've got an awareness of the history that most people wouldn't have as they're wandering around, and the city has changed and continues to change so much.
I've read years and years ago. I read a history of Melbourne and describing, I think it was Spring Street, where the carts used to have to dodge their way around the Manigums, and then where the Fitzroy Gardens are today, the Manigums there, they'd actually have the Indigenous kids would go up the manna-gum trees to actually get the white manna off the gum trees. That's why they're called manna-gums. There's a little insect that makes a little sweet, sort of like candy floss type thing, and that would be, it's a sweet thing that's part of the Indigenous diet. Sweet, yummy, delicious. That's why I call it manna-gum. So I can imagine those trees. You can still see some of those remnant trees, and so we've got this ancient landscape onto which to put this amazing city. You know, it was in the 1880s Melbourne, after all that money that came from that gold rush, it was one of the biggest and best cities in the world. It had the first lifts, elevators in buildings were in Melbourne, and you can still see that in the fabric, and you can still see there's that. I love walking through Little Burke up Celestial Lane and seeing the fact that there's actually a place called Celestial Lane, named, which is it's a racist term, the Celestials, for the people who came from Canton during the gold rush, and there's still those buildings there from that period built by the Cantonese settlers who came to Melbourne as part of that. And you can still go wandering up the Supper Inn, the stairs, those creaky stairs, and there's still that unbroken link back to that period of time when people came to Melbourne to start a new life, and we're still eating those Cantonese style dishes.
What is it about all this that you love? Like, why do you love to draw these connections?
A curious mind. I'm a child. I promised myself when I was young I'd never grow up, and I just have that innate sense of curiosity. Why? How? And so, because everything's got a story behind it. It's just that it's just been a writer and specialising in food. There's a story behind everything, and just got to ask a few questions, like the dim sim, for example. I know the Melbourne Food and Wine Festival is celebrating the dim sim with some of their programming, and the Dirty Dozen does that as well. The dim sim is one of the most amazing pieces of Melbourne street food. It is unique. It started here in Melbourne. It is a Melbourne thing. You don't see dim sims in other parts of the world like we have here in Melbourne. And it was created by Elizabeth Chong's father. Elizabeth Chong's a Melbourne food writer. Her father started making dim sims. He took the dumpling and just changed it around a little bit. He changed the ingredients, used different filling, and changed the style of the skin, the wrapper around it, to make it more durable, more heavier. So it's a much thicker, heavier skin. He made it in that format so it could be manufactured, and so it could be refrigerated. And he started a business creating the dim sim. Think about the big issue. The big issue is published and basically bought by people who are down and out, and they sell on the street to earn a living. And that's his model. It was, I'm going to make these dim sims and sell them to people who from China, from Germany, Canton, who are down and out, who are down their luck, and they buy them from me, and they then sell them in vans as street food. And that was a business model to help. It was basically an act of altruism. It was an act of charity. And that's how the dim sim started. And I think it was Elizabeth Chong's brother who had a Greek mate, and he showed them to his Greek mate who had a fish and chip shop. He went, oh yeah, I'll take them. Yeah, I might even deep fry them. How about that? And that's how the dim sim started. It's this beautiful story of generosity, of ingenuity, of links back to the past, but a transformation. It is one of the most beautiful Melbourne stories. And Kenny Pittock, the ceramicist, the artist, has actually recreated a steamed dim sim and a fried dim sim in a paper bag, or what looks like a paper bag, out of clay. It's beautiful.
Oh, I love it. I cannot wait to see this exhibition. We've talked about your curiosity, your work as a food writer, your love of putting things in context, and the fact that everything has a story. For a long time, you and also myself, we wrote for the print section about food that came out with The Age and also the Sydney Morning Herald. It was called Epicure in Melbourne, and then Melbourne took on the Sydney name, which was Good Living, and then Good Food. The print section didn't return in 2025. Good Food is now only online. Actually, that's not true. The Good Food does appear in print, but not as its own section. It's a daily page in the newspaper. And I mean, what do you think about this shift?
Fairfax newspaper's owned by Nine. They're the people who make the Today Show and a Current Affair, and they are really about ratings, about making money out of eyeballs on screens, on pages, and so. And they have a system in all the newspaper stories now, like a traffic light system. If a story's red, there's no eyeballs on the page. If it's amber, it's okay. If it's green, it's going well. And then the algorithm then shuffles around the website. The stories I like to write: history, context, environment. They don't rate. It doesn't get the eyeballs on screen. They appeal to a much smaller demographic of reader, and so I am, as all media is now becoming focused purely on eyeballs and on us, just basically on numbers. There's fewer places for people like me who are interested in those longer form, more interesting stories. There's still places for I write for other publications like the Saturday paper, the Australian Film Review, and other publications. But Good Food is, it needs to make money. It needs to make money for its owners. With the owners is Nine, and Nine know how to do popular, and they do popular really well. And I think, but he also thinks that, like, if you look at the way the Guardian in the UK handles food, it has previously done a lot of work on food environment, food and culture, food and context. And it too is turned more just to eyeball material, which is recipes for meals that are done on a budget, and that's a global thing.
So, do you regret that this has happened, or you're just looking elsewhere to get your stories told? Are you doing exhibitions with artifacts made of clay? Is it just about? Is it about how do you feel about it as a food writer?
It's not in my control. It's not in my control, the changing landscape of media. And so because it's not in my control, there's nothing I can do about it. There's still a huge amount of interest for intelligent, informed people who are interested in food for knowledge and for learning. And so I'm turning more and more to events, hands-on events. And because people actually really want that culture, they really want to see things, to touch things, to eat things, to learn and to be immersed. And so a lot of time in regional Victoria, working on events. What am I doing? Doing this exhibition. I'm working on a couple of festivals, working on a book, and also still pitching the stories of interest to the publications that are interested in those stories. But to me, Dani, I'm the luckiest person in the world. I've got to travel around the world, work with chefs. I've written 2 books of Mexican food. I've worked in Mexico. I've worked with Frank Camorra and Movida Group in Spain. I had to learn Spanish. My Spanish is really good when I'm drunk, and so I got to do all this stuff. I'm the luckiest person in the world. Food has taken me to work with First Nations people in Australia, and there's always something new to learn because there is so much history, there is so much complexity, and the more I know how little I know.
I feel like that too. Richard, thank you so much for coming and chatting to us today. Congratulations on the Dirty Dozen stories behind the foods that made Melbourne part of this year's Melbourne Food and Wine Festival and on show at the City Gallery at Melbourne Town Hall. So happy to have you on the show finally. Have a great day. I understand you're going scuba diving later.
Yeah, I'm going to look for this deserted beach between Avalon and Werribee River, so I'm going to check that out today and go for a little bit of a snorkel underwater.
All right, enjoy. Have a good one, and thank you.
Thanks, Dani.
This is Dirty Linen, and I'm Dani Valent. We air the issues that the hospitality industry finds hard to talk about, hearing from different people with unique perspectives. We want to hear from you as well. If you have something that needs to be said about a topic, get in touch so we can include your perspective. Contact us at dirtylinen@deepintheweeds.com.au or hit us up on Insta at Dirty Linen Podcast. We can't wait to hear from you.
This is a Deep in the Weeds production.